So before I went to go see Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I thought I'd revisit the entire franchise, and today I'm going to rank all of the Ghostbusters films from the worst to the best. Hey guys, if you're new here, make sure to check out my review for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which goes into more detail with that film. I think this is my first ever franchise ranking actually, because I've done director rankings. I've ranked Greta Gerwig's films. I ranked Denis Villeneuve's films with Dune Part 2 this month. As a point of reference for this ranking, I've said before I'm not a huge fan of Ghostbusters. I didn't grow up with it, so I might have different opinions here and there than the general crowd. But with all that being said, let's get to ranking this franchise. Easily coming in last place is Ghostbusters 2016. A film so controversial when it first came out, and one that as I rewatched for this ranking, I realized it's so flawed. There's just so much to talk about that you already have enough to talk about without having to go into politics at all. So there's that. I will say there are some slight things I do like about this film. For one thing, it's a good cast. I like the effects that are used in this film regarding the ghosts and this weird 3D looking aesthetic that they did at times where they put black bars on the top and bottom of a screen and then the ghost appears to be breaking through that, and that's an interesting effect. And then when you go into the score, it has a different but kind of nice modern spin to the iconic Ghostbusters theme. Everything else in this film just falls apart. I mean, for one thing, this film isn't even funny. You have these actresses who I've seen funny elsewhere. What they had to work with doesn't give them justice. The humor is just very low hanging at certain points where it's talking about farts and poo. The original Ghostbusters actually had smart comedy in it. It actually had adult comedy in it, and this is just a massive downgrade from that. Even you got Chris Hemsworth in this film as this really dumb guy. So dumb that it just stretches credibility, and it's a joke bombardment. The villain is particularly bad. His dialogue is just very hammy, very over the top. This boring trope of the nerd gone bad. And when you get to the third act, I'm not kidding, it's probably one of the worst third acts I've seen in a modern-ish blockbuster. I know this film came out years ago, but I still consider it to be a modern film in a certain sense. And it's just bad. I mean, it just goes so out there, so balls deep crazy. The fact where you have a Ghostbuster at a certain point pull out proton guns like it's a Western. I enjoy watching crazy stuff, but there's a certain line that I still have. And when you cross that line, then it becomes way too much for me. It just felt like them taking this comedy and shoving it through the generic comic book template where you have a character at a certain point floating through a vortex. And it's what I call a wash of CGI crap because it's just so much CGI thrown at the screen and yet it lacks substance. I will give it props for not being a direct copy of that original film, but just at the end of the day, this feels like a high-budget SNL parody of Ghostbusters that at times I can't even believe how it existed. Next up, we have Ghostbusters 2. And as a point of reference, from here on up, these are films I either have a moderate enjoyment of to I really enjoy. And with Ghostbusters 2, it is a diminishing returns for this franchise for sure. Not nearly as good as the original. What I like about it is that it keeps the characters consistent. The characters are still fun and likable just like they were in the original film. I mean, you got the chemistry between Peter and Dana, and I thought that was one of the strongest points of the film. Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver work really well together, and they really bring that dynamic home. And still, this film has good jokes, good humor, that maybe isn't as fresh as the original, but it still works. And when you get the introduction of the mood slime in here, I thought that was an interesting concept for a ghost. that it's affected by the mood and can affect the mood of certain characters. This film is flawed. The opening undoes kind of a victory of the previous, where the city once again doesn't like the Ghostbusters. It was kind of a cheap way to kind of set up the plot of the film, I thought. You get to the villain, not as bad as the villain we have in 2016, but he's still pretty boring. And looking at the original and then Ghostbusters 2, you can pick out that 2 uses a lot of the same plot structure, a lot of the same plot beats, and in that way it's very familiar, where it once again has a montage of them ghostbusting once they've come back. It once again has a jail scene. It once again has the part where ghosts break out throughout the city. And also, when you're talking about Ghostbusters 2, at least for me, all the character stuff was more interesting than all the ghost stuff. And that's kind of unfortunate when you have a film titled Ghostbusters 2. I feel like those aspects should be more equal, and some of the films above here got that right. But putting that all together, absolutely no ill against this film. It's perfectly fine. It's one of the weaker entries of this franchise for sure. Cracking our top 3, we have the recently released Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And if you've seen my review, you know that I thought this film was a mixed bag. There's certainly stuff I like about it, like the cast, the dynamics between their characters. The ghostbusting sequences have really good effects to them. They're really well directed, especially in the opening car chase that is very exciting. But it's also a film that is overcrowded because it has a lot of characters. Not just has a wealth of legacy characters, but also has a wealth of new characters, some that are just being introduced. And then also you got all the characters from Afterlife. There's a lot of subplots going on. You have ideas that are familiar, and then you have some good ideas that are original concepts for this franchise and interesting places for it to explore, and it just doesn't develop that to where it should be. There's a lot more Easter eggs, I would say, in this film, where Afterlife had Easter eggs for sure, but here it just feels like the film kind of pauses itself to remind you of the original. For me, it was just kind of an empty sequel, an emotionally empty film. And I debated putting this over or below Ghostbusters 2, but at the end of the day, I think I have more desire to rewatch Frozen Empire than I do 2, so that's why it's above here. A film that I still urge you to go see if you're a Ghostbusters fan, but for me personally, there was a lot to be desired out of this one. Coming in at number 2, we have the original Ghostbusters. And that is one of the newest hot takes I've figured out about myself rewatching this franchise. I acknowledge that this is a classic. This is a really good comedy, a really fun film, really well made, and just such an original, great concept that's unlike anything that had been seen at this point inside of a comedy, or inside of a film for that matter. It also excels in having ghosts through practicality. But also, when you get to that ending and you have Stay Puft, still holds up to this day and delivers one of the most iconic endings of a film in history. But then, you can't have this original Ghostbusters film be as good as it is without Bill Murray, who has his signature, like, deadpan, comedic edge that is so great and just so likable and endearing, even though he's kind of an ass. This one set up that compelling dynamic between him and Sigourney Weaver, who they have great chemistry with each other. But just again, this film was so original in its own right, and being able to combine comedy with horror and doing this weird idea of what if there were exterminators for ghosts, but actually being able to pull that off. And that is because you have actual technical craft here, actual great performances, and really good writing that really pulls it through and takes this admittedly cheesy concept and makes a film that so many people have grown up with, have loads of nostalgia with, and consider it one of the best films ever made. All that being said, while I can admire the craft that's on display, personally for me, Ghostbusters has never been a film that I have loved. I mean, for one thing, I didn't grow up with it. Admittedly, there are moments of CGI that don't really hold up, and for me, it's really a product of its time. It has like that popular song syndrome, where you've heard it so many times, so many people talk about it. Just in that alone, it's kind of lost its flavor because you watch it's like, yeah, it's good. What else? Peter Venkman is, of course, the face of the Ghostbusters in this, but all the other Ghostbusters are not quite as interesting as he is. And I would have liked to see their characters fleshed out a bit more. But putting aside all those personal gripes, this film still deserves to be one of the top tier of this franchise. But coming in at a surprising number one, which I thought for certain the original was going to be number one, but I rewatched this and I was so pleasantly surprised by the second viewing and just how much it actually meant to me this time around. But with Ghostbusters Afterlife, you had come off kind of an okay sequel in Ghostbusters 2. You had a kind of bad remake in 2016. Afterlife is what really had to do the hard work to bring back this franchise after many years and bring it back in a way that actually respected the original's legacy. And it does that by having this really fresh story, these fresh characters, while still tapping into an 80s feel. It's a film that crosses the streams with Stranger Things, especially because you have Finn Wolfhard in this, but the fact that it is an adventure with teens and that on itself completely separates it from the original and makes it something wholly new and makes it something that newer generations can latch onto a bit more and become fans of this franchise as a result. It really is a back to basics film that is elevated by the writing, that is elevated by these surprisingly fleshed out characters. Which of those new characters, McKenna Grace, the character arc that she goes through, is absolutely the standout. But what really gets me with this film is just all the themes of family legacy. For some reason, that is always very compelling to me. And it's not just a question for the characters in this film, but it's also a question for the director, Jason Reitman. How is he going to pay respect to the ginormous legacy left behind by his father? This is not just a film. It is a film from a family. It's a film with actual spark, with actual heart. And for me, it's the most emotionally affecting film in this franchise. That even when it's going for admittedly cheesy fan service, even when it's pulling inspiration from films of the past, it does all of that from the heart. The original I just find to be more entertaining than anything else. But for me, I go to films not just for entertainment, but I also go to feel something. And this film was fun. It was emotional. And above all, for me, it was very surprising rediscovering the compelling story that lies at the heart of Ghostbusters Afterlife. So putting that all together, it comes in at number one. Guys, what are your rankings of the Ghostbuster films? Whatever it is, leave it down below in the comment section below. I'm very interested to get a discussion out of this, especially because of my weird ranking as soon as you get to the top three. If you like this content, make sure to hit the subscribe button, the like, make sure to hit the bell for notifications, and guys, I'll catch you next time.